Before this video tells you anything, make a decision, something small, move your left hand, or don't. You just felt something, didn't you? A sense of authorship, of being the one who decided. Hold on to that feeling, because in 1983, a neuroscientist named Benjamin Libet wired volunteers up to an EEG at the University of California, San Francisco, asked them to flick their wrist whenever they felt like it, and measured exactly what happened in the brain in the moments before they moved. What he found has unsettled science and philosophy ever since. The brain, specifically a region called the supplementary motor area, had already initiated the movement approximately 550 milliseconds before the person was consciously aware of deciding to move. Half a second. The decision came first. The feeling of deciding came after. The conscious experience of choosing, that sense of authorship you felt 10 seconds ago when you moved your hand, appears to arrive late, not as the cause of the action, as the story the mind tells about an action already underway. Which means the question isn't whether free will feels real. It obviously does. The question is what that feeling actually is. 5 traditions have been wrestling with exactly that. None of them agree, and all of them are worth hearing. Let's start with the Stoics, because they were the first Western tradition to take the problem seriously and arrive somewhere genuinely useful. Epictetus, writing in the 1st century AD, made a distinction that sounds simple until you sit with it. There are things in your control and things that are not. Your body, your reputation, your circumstances, other people's opinions, not in your control. Your judgments, your intentions, the way you respond to what happens to you, that is where you live. That is where freedom is. The Stoics were not naive about determinism. They believed the universe operated according to a rational order, the logos, and that events unfolded according to that order, whether you liked it or not. A Stoic would not have been particularly surprised by Libet's result. Of course, the body moves according to prior causes. The question was never whether the physical world is determined. The question was whether your inner response to that world is yours. And the Stoics said, that part, emphatically, is. This is not free will in the absolute sense. It is something more practical and arguably more honest. It is the freedom to meet what happens with intention rather than reaction. Marcus Aurelius called it the one thing no one can take from you. He wrote that in a journal he never intended to publish, which is part of why it still reads as true. Buddhism arrives at a stranger place. The Buddhist position on free will is complicated by the fact that Buddhism also denies the existence of the self that would have it. If anatta, the teaching of no fixed permanent self, is correct, then asking whether you have free will is a little like asking whether a river makes choices. The river flows. Causes and conditions produce effects. There is no separate entity standing outside the process, pulling levers. And yet Buddhism does not collapse into fatalism. The tradition places enormous weight on intention. Satana in Pali. Not the outcome of actions, which is subject to infinite causes and conditions, but the quality of mind from which action arises. A deliberately kind action and a reflexively kind action are not the same thing karmically, even if they look identical from the outside. Something in the orientation of the mind matters, even within a system where the fixed self is an illusion. What Buddhism is pointing at is something closer to this. There may be no free will in the philosophical sense, but there is the possibility of waking up to the process, of seeing the causes and conditions clearly enough that the grip of unconscious reactivity loosens. You may not be free from causation, but you can become less enslaved to it. That distinction is quiet. It is also one of the most practically useful ideas in the entire history of human thought. Islam enters this question with a tension it has never fully resolved and has never pretended to. The Islamic theological tradition holds two things simultaneously that appear to be in conflict. First, Allah is all-knowing, which means every event, every choice, every outcome is known to God before it occurs. This is qadar, divine decree. Second, human beings are morally responsible for their actions. Judgment is real. Accountability is real. The choices you make matter eternally. How can both be true? Islamic scholars have debated this for 14 centuries. The Ash'ari school, which became the dominant theological position in Sunni Islam, developed the concept of kasbi, usually translated as acquisition. The idea is that God creates the action, but the human being acquires it through their will and intention, and it is that acquisition which grounds moral responsibility. It is not a fully satisfying resolution to the philosophical problem. The tradition largely acknowledges this and places the ultimate answer in the domain of divine mystery, beyond what human reason alone can reach. What Islam refuses to do is dissolve either side of the tension. The sovereignty of God is not negotiable. Neither is human accountability. The tradition holds both and lives in the space between them, which requires a kind of intellectual humility that pure determinism and pure libertarian free will both avoid. Existentialism takes all of this and throws it in the opposite direction entirely. Jean-Paul Sartre, writing in post-war Paris in the late 1940s, argued that the problem with most philosophical accounts of human freedom is that they start in the wrong place. They look for the nature of the human being first, and then ask how much freedom fits within it. Sartre reversed the order. Existence precedes essence. You are not born with a fixed nature. You arrive first, and then you make yourself through your choices. There is no predetermined human nature to constrain you, no divine blueprint, no essential self that your freedom must negotiate with. The consequence of this sounds liberating. It is actually terrifying. Sartre used the word condemned. You are condemned to be free, because there is no fixed nature, there is no excuse. You cannot blame your upbringing, your character, your circumstances, your biology. Every moment you are choosing, and the choosing is absolute. Bad faith, mauvaise foi, is what Sartre called the very human tendency to pretend otherwise, to act as though you had no choice, to play a role so completely that you forget you chose to put it on. Sartre did not know about Benjamin Libet. It would be interesting to know what he would have made of him. And then there is the hard determinist position, which takes Libet's result and follows it to its conclusion without blinking. If every event in the universe, including every neural firing in your brain, is the product of prior causes operating according to physical laws, then the experience of choosing is real as an experience but illusory as a cause. You feel like you're deciding. The feeling is itself a physical event, produced by prior physical events, producing subsequent physical events. There is no gap in the causal chain where a free agent steps in. The self that seems to be choosing is, on this view, more like a very sophisticated readout than a genuine originator. Sam Harris, the neuroscientist and philosopher, has argued this position clearly in recent years, that free will, defined as the ability to have done otherwise under identical conditions, is simply not coherent. Not because life doesn't feel like choosing, it does, but because the thoughts and intentions that feel like yours arise from causes you did not choose and cannot fully see. You no more chose your first thought this morning than you chose your height. This is the most uncomfortable position in the video because it is the one that offers the least. No Stoic inner citadel, no Buddhist path of awakening, no existentialist project of self-creation, just the universe, doing what it does, with you as part of it. Here is what is strange about all 5 of these positions. Every single one of them, the Stoic, the Buddhist, the Islamic, the existentialist, the hard determinist, agrees that the experience of choosing is real. None of them deny that. What they disagree about is what that experience means, what it's grounded in, and what follows from it. The Stoic says, use it. The Buddhist says, see through it, and act with more awareness because of what you see. The Islamic tradition says, it is real, and you will be held to it, even if its ultimate nature exceeds your understanding. Sartre says, it is absolute and inescapable, and the weight of it is yours to carry. The hard determinist says, it is real as a feeling and causally inert as a force. Enjoy the ride. None of these is obviously wrong. None of them is obviously complete. If you're finding this worthwhile, and the fact that you're still here suggests you are, this would be a good moment to subscribe. This channel exists to do exactly this. Take the questions that every human being carries and hear what every tradition has to say about them. No sides, no agenda, just the question seen from every angle. There are more of these coming, and they are worth being here for. Go back to Benjamin Libet for a moment, because his own conclusion is almost never quoted when people cite his experiment. Libet spent years after his 1983 paper thinking about what it actually meant. He did not become a hard determinist. What he noticed in his data was something quieter. The brain initiated the movement before conscious awareness, but conscious awareness arrived before the movement was complete, and in that window he found evidence of what he called the veto. The conscious mind could not initiate the action, but it appeared to be able to stop it, to interrupt it. Not a free will of origination, a free will of refusal. He called this conscious mental field theory, and it was not widely accepted. But the observation is worth sitting with. Maybe freedom is not the power to start something from nothing. Maybe it is the capacity to pause, to notice, to not do the thing the pattern was already doing. That is not the absolute freedom existentialism demands. It is not the divine decree Islam holds. It is not the Stoic inner citadel or the Buddhist awakening. But it is something, a small, real, measurable gap between the impulse and the act. Whether that gap is enough to ground moral responsibility, to justify praise and blame, to make the word freedom mean anything, that is the question every tradition in this video is still answering. And now, so are you. What do you believe? Not the philosophical position you find most defensible, the one that feels true when you stop thinking about it. Leave it below, and notice when you do, whether you feel like you chose to.